we have pointed out from time to time in this study, we are studying the book of the revelation of Jesus Christ, the complete revealing of Jesus and the Christian religion from its beginning here on the earth, down the stream of time to where we now are, on into the future to the judgment and into eternity. This book is written in signs and symbols, natural signs of spiritual realities, because the Lord sent and signified these things by his angel to his servant John. John was told in verse 19 of the first chapter to write the things which he had seen, the things which were, and the things which would be thereafter. He had seen in chapter 1 Jesus in the midst of the golden candlesticks, representing Jesus as the head over his church. The things which were in existence at the time that John received this book was the condition of the 7 churches of Asia, recorded in chapters 2 and 3. Then in chapter 4, verse 1, John was invited to look through this doorway into heaven, where he would be shown things that would be thereafter. And so he saw the glory of heaven. He saw the significance of the blood sacrifice of Jesus Christ as the Lamb which had prevailed to take the book of 7 seals and to open it and to loose the seals thereof. And then we find in chapter 6 Jesus opening these seals, and the first seal is opened, and we see symbols of primitive Christianity in the white horse and its rider. Then under the second seal we see symbolized the pagan Roman Empire. Under the third seal we see symbolized the apostasy. Under the fourth seal, in the pale horse and its rider, which is called death, we see papal Rome, which served as an instrument of death against the saints of Jesus Christ. And then the Bible says that Hades followed after. That is, the state of the dead then, of course, would follow after death. And in the fifth seal, when the fifth seal was opened, the scene was the martyrs of Jesus Christ under the altar of martyrdom, crying out to the Lord in heaven, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?" And white robes were given unto every one of them. They was told to rest for a little season until their fellow servants that should be killed as they were would be fulfilled. Therefore the Lord assured them that he would judge those that had killed them. He would judge the persecutors of Christianity, but that the persecution was to go on for a while until that those judgments would begin. Then when the sixth seal was opened, we see symbolized in figurative language here events that would lead to God's judgments against the wicked. Events that would lead to the great day of God's wrath. But then in chapter 7 we find a parenthetical chapter which shows that before that God's judgment would come against the wicked, that the saints would be sealed, and especially those that constituted the Christian martyrs, those that were giving their lives for the cause of Jesus Christ. They were given a guarantee that the cause which they had given their lives for would surely be lifted back to its rightful place here upon the earth, that they had not died in vain, and that God would stand with them and by the cause which they had died for. But now then we come to chapter 8, in which that the 7th seal is going to be opened. And when this 7th seal is opened, we're going to find the blowing of 7 trumpets altogether. In the lesson tonight, we'll notice the first 6 trumpets. And then later in chapter 11, we will cover the sounding of the 7th trumpet. But under the 7th seal now is going to blow the judgment trumpets of God against the wicked. When that 7th trumpet sounds, God's judgment against the wicked will be complete. But 6 of his judgment trumpets pertained to the destruction of the Roman Empire for what they had did in opposition against the principles of Christianity. So we notice now in chapter 8, and when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. Now, whether this is simply a pause, this silence in heaven for the space of half an hour, whether it's just a pause between two parts of this vision, the sixth and the seventh seal, it could be something of that nature, or we might look at it like this, which I like to think of it in this manner, and that is that sometimes, before there comes a storm, that it gets real quiet. There's a calm before the storm. We can look at it in that manner because really that is what happened. There was going to be a great storm of God's judgments against the wicked then very shortly. And so when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour, the calm before the storm. And I saw the seven angels which stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. We have noticed that the number 7 shows perfection and completeness. A complete judgment now is about to be rendered against the wicked for fighting against the principles of God. And another angel came and stood at the altar having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. This judgment that God, this complete judgment that God now was about to cast out upon the wicked, one thing that had prompted it was the prayers of the saints. There is strength in the prayers of the saints. We know that the Christian martyrs were praying to the Lord and crying to the Lord to take vengeance upon their persecutors as they cried out from under the altar of suffering and the altar of martyrdom in the fifth seal for the Lord to take vengeance upon those that had shed their blood. But not only were the martyrs praying to God, but there were other saints that were praying to God too. And all of these prayers were being considered and were being conveyed by heavenly messengers before the throne of God. For notice it says, an angel came and stood at the altar having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayer of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. The prayers of the martyrs crying from the altar of suffering, and the prayers of the saints here on the earth who also were involved and concerned about the advancement of Christianity. These prayers was coming up before the throne of God, and in answer to these prayers, God was now about to cast out his judgments upon the ungodly, and especially very shortly upon the Roman Empire for what they had did against Christianity. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth, and there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. So the judgments of God now were going to be strong, and they were going to be powerful. And the 7 angels, verse 6 says, which had the 7 trumpets, prepared themselves to sound. The judgments were now then ready to begin. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. We gather from this language bloodshed and destruction here upon the earth, where trees grow and where grass grows and so forth. Now, whether the destruction by saying that the third part of the trees was burned up and all the green grass was burnt up, whether this is just language showing that there was going to be a great destruction and bloodshed upon land, that perhaps could be the meaning of the symbol. Or whether that the grass might refer to the common class of people and the trees referring to rulers within the land from a figurative standpoint, regardless of which that it might be, we find that there was to be a judgment upon the land against the persecutors of Christianity. And the Roman Empire, pagan Rome, it was the first major enemy of Christianity, and it was now to be judged by God's justice. And so we find under the first trumpet here, there was something that was going to affect the Roman Empire upon the land. Now then, it was to affect the western part of the Roman Empire, because the eastern part of the Roman Empire stood even after that the western part had been defeated. Expositors and commentaries and so forth understand this first trumpet to be the Goths' invasion of Rome under Alaric, their leader. There was a great invasion against Rome on land by the Goths. And of course this affected and weakened the western part of the Roman Empire. But now then notice with the sounding of the second trumpet. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed. So we find now destruction on the sea, bloodshed on the sea, war on the sea, into the which that a portion of the creatures on the sea died, and a portion of the ships were destroyed in this destruction. And it is understood that the second trumpet would meet what happened when the Vandals won their sea victory against Rome under Genseric, their leader. And so there was a great sea battle, and the Vandals won a sea victory which weakened the western part of the Roman Empire. And of course this warfare and this bloodshed happened on the sea. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, the word wormwood indicating bitterness. And many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. So we find now there is going to be destruction on the rivers. And the Huns' attacks on Rome under Attila meets this description, because his campaigns were carried upon the headwaters of the rivers and along the rivers of Italy, is the way that these attacks against the western part of the Roman Empire took place. Now when the Goths made their invasion of Rome under Alaric, their leader, and weakened the Roman Empire, and when the Vandals won their sea victory against Rome, this further weakened the western part of the Roman Empire. And when the Huns made their attacks on Rome, they further, upon the waterways, we find that this further weakened the Roman Empire. But then there was to come the striking blow that would bring to an end the western part of the Roman Empire. It had lived by the sword, and it was going down by the sword. Now, sometimes God uses carnal powers to bring about his providential will. Sometimes God will use people who within themselves are wicked to bring about something that would bring judgment upon evil people. For example, this simple illustration, Romans the 13th chapter, pertaining to civil authorities. He says of civil authorities that they're ministers of God to execute judgment upon them that do evil. Well, most of the people that's in the civil laws, make the civil laws and enact the civil laws, the officers and so forth, most of them are sinners. Most of them are wrong as far as their life is concerned. But God uses them to bring about punishment of the evildoers, you see. Even though they might be wicked themselves, the system that they are with, God allows that system to punish evildoers and bring about justice. Under the Old Testament, when Israel was serving God acceptably and keeping His commandments, they won. He allowed them to win over their enemies. But when Israel disobeyed the commandments of God to bring them back into line or to teach them His authority, He would allow their enemies to defeat them at times. Therefore, God will sometimes use civil powers. God will sometimes use wicked powers to bring about punishment or judgment upon someone else that needs judgment. The Roman Empire lived by the sword, and it was to go down by the sword. For we find in Revelation, the 13th chapter, he says, "He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. Therefore they that take the sword shall perish with the sword." Again, we find back in Daniel when he speaks about the world empires, and he speaks that they were left to other people, but when it came to the kingdom of God, he says, it shall not be left to other people, but it'll break in pieces and consume these kingdoms. The Babylonian Empire lived by the sword. It went down by the sword. And we find the Medes and Persians, the Second World Empire, lived by the sword, were defeated by the sword. The Grecian Empire lived by the sword, went down by the sword. So did the Roman Empire. But when it came to the kingdom of God, inspiration says that it would not be left to other people, but it would break in pieces and consume these kingdoms, and that the kingdom of the Lord would stand forever. But the Roman Empire had been a wicked force fighting against the principles of Christianity and was to be judged. So God used and allowed other wicked forces to come against this wicked force and bring it to judgment by casting His judgments against them in allowing their enemies to win victories over them. But the thing that finally brought the downfall to the western part of the Roman Empire was that which happened under the sounding of the fourth trumpet. Let us notice now as the fourth angel sounds. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars. So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. Excuse me. When the Roman Empire was in full force, the Roman Empire shone forth as the sun shines out, as the moon and the stars shine forth. We find their illuminating powers to give forth light. And when it was in its prime, figuratively speaking, you might say that it looked in that manner, shining forth the full light of the empire. But there was something that was going to bring it to naught. There was something that was going to be a blow against the Roman Empire to the extent that part of its leadership and part of those that made it a shining force in humanity, it was going to cause these things to go out.
And so it was when this fourth trumpet sounded. In the year 476 AD, we find that the last emperor of the Roman Empire, Romulus Augustulus, he was ousted by the Heruli under Odoacer, their king, and we find that this completely defeated and brought to an end the western part of the Roman Empire. It was defeated and went down to defeat. But the eastern part of the Roman Empire, with headquarters in Constantinople, still remained. But the western part of the empire had completely been judged by the power of God. His judgment trumpets had blown against this portion of the Roman Empire, and it was completely defeated in AD 476. Now, Christianity had been set up here on the earth in AD 33. We find there had been battles of Christianity with the pagan Roman Empire, spiritually, of course. And then, of course, the great apostasy had come up within the church, and this caused problems for Christianity. And so we find that Christianity had these battles. But we find that the western part of the Roman Empire now had received its judgments. And finally, the eastern part was going to be judged also. But we noticed that under the fourth seal came up another power, and we're going to show where it arises now, the papal power, papal Rome. Now remember, the western part of the empire, with headquarters in Rome, it fell when the last Roman ruler was ousted. But now then the power falls to the eastern part of the empire, with headquarters in Constantinople, and in the year AD 533, Rome was revived. Because the Eastern Emperor, Justinian, issued a decretal letter declaring that the Bishop of Rome was head of the churches. Of course, all that he could make him head of was the apostate churches, because there was no way that he could make him head of the Lord's church. Because Jesus, when he rose from the grave and ascended up on high and received his kingdom, he became head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him that filleth all in all, and he has no successors. He will be the head of his church when he comes back again to take it. He's head of his church still tonight, and nobody could replace him. Therefore, all that the emperor in Constantinople could do was just to declare that the Bishop of Rome was head of the apostate churches, because now that apostasy that had taken place within Christianity, it had grown strong enough, and we find that the apostates joined forces with the leaders of the eastern part of the Roman Empire, to the degree that now then a religious and a civil power rose up together, because the apostasy now had the recognition of the Roman Empire, of the eastern part of it that yet remained, and the Bishop of Rome was recognized as head of the churches. This was in the year AD 533. And we would understand that this would be the beginning of what is known as the Dark Ages. Now, of course, in the year 606, this decree was confirmed when Boniface was brought in as Pope. And Alexander Campbell reasoned in his debate with Priest Purcell that an institution could not be in existence prior to its head. And since there was no head to the Catholic Church until the year 606, that had to be the beginning of the Roman Catholic Church. However, the decree had been made in 533 by Justinian that he recognized the Bishop of Rome as head of the churches, and this was the only way that Rome could have been revived, was by this spiritual power. And it's amazing to everybody who considers it of how that the western part of the empire could have had such a great defeat, but yet have come back with such great power and with such great force, with such great carnal power even, through the popes of Rome. And it came back a strong power, because we're going to notice that even after that the Eastern Empire fell, the papal power out of Rome still went on for a while as a persecuting power against the saints of Jesus Christ. Of course, God's judgments are going to come upon papal Rome also, for in the second portion of the book of Revelation, when we notice the pouring out of God's wrath, the first 6 vials are going to be poured out on papal Rome. And of course the 7th will bring papal Rome and all wicked powers to their complete defeat. But the papal power came up after that the carnal power here had come up, or the pagan power had come up. The pagan power is judged first. The papal power also will be judged because of her persecuting the saints of Jesus Christ through the Dark Ages. So at 476, the Western Empire had been judged and came down to defeat under the blowing of the first 4 judgment trumpets of God. In between the 4th and the 5th trumpets, in 533, the papal power came into existence and was recognized by the Eastern Empire, and came into great power with the force of the government behind it. But now then, God's trumpets are to continue to blow until pagan Rome, in its completeness, goes down to defeat. So after these trumpets had blown, it says, "And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels which are yet to sound." There was to be 3 more woes against the wicked for fighting against God. 2 of them were going to come under the 5th and the 6th trumpet, and then, of course, the final one would be the final trumpet when judgment comes and all of the wicked are condemned. Chapter 9. "And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit." Now we understand that Jesus was given the keys to Jesus gave the Apostle Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Now a key is something that you would open or something with, or that you would make secure with. And the Apostle Peter was given the keys to the kingdom of heaven. But here is one that is given the key of the bottomless pit. The bottomless pit is the abode of wicked spirits, the abode of the devil and wicked spirits. And so we know that what is going to be gathered out of the bottomless pit is something which is evil and something which is wicked. Now here is a star. Now a star of heaven is a great thing and a glorious thing. But until when it falls, you see it falls and it burns out. So this is not a star that we're talking about here that's held in esteem by the Lord, but it's a fallen star, one who falls from the glory of God, one who is not in good favor with God. The 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. That is, it was in a state of carnality, and he was given the authority of the bottomless pit. Something was going to come out of the region of wicked spirits now by the opening up of the bottomless pit with his key. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. Now, the sun is a glorious light, and its purpose is to give light. And the air that we breathe is nourishing and is a necessity of life as long as it's pure. But you know, whenever that the sun would be blurred with smoke, you can't even see anything hardly, well then this smoke is causing some damage to our vision, and it clouds up our vision from the light of the sun. And when this same smoke would come into our nostrils and we're breathing smoke rather than air, then of course then of course the air that we breathe that would give life, we are now in a state of discomfort because the air is polluted. They claim that some of the best air we have is out in Arizona. You know, we're real concerned about the air anymore because the air we breathe is polluted. Now, if the air wasn't polluted, it's one of the greatest things that God has ever given us, the air that we breathe. But here we find that when this bottomless pit was opened with this key, that there came a smoke out of the bottomless pit that darkened the sun and darkened the air, made the air impure and darkened the sun. Now, what was it that came out of the bottomless pit? We would understand that it was a false doctrine that came out of the bottomless pit through the work and the power of a false prophet. We believe this false prophet to be Mohammed, that this false doctrine came forth and that it had its beginning from Satan, and that it was placed here upon the earth to pollute, and it did pollute. Because if one would believe the teachings of Mohammedanism, then the light of the gospel of Christ would be darkened to that individual. And the purity that Christianity brings forth to people, that purity would be impaired by the false doctrine of Mohammedanism, you see. And so we find that the devil, through the doctrine of Mohammedanism, he now was going to promote a doctrine that would be contrary to Christianity, but at the same time it was going to be something that would have a stinging effect against the eastern part of the Roman Empire as a judgment of God against it. So this evidently was a false doctrine by a false prophet, which if believed would place a cloud over the truth. Evidently it was Mohammed. And out of this smoke or false religion, which is Mohammedanism, came locusts, and locusts are destroying insects, and evidently this was the warriors who were the followers of Mohammed. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth. Those that accepted this false religion of Mohammedanism, they would come forth as locusts to have a stinging effect here upon the earth. And unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. So they were going to have a stinging effect against somebody here upon this earth. And we'll notice in just a moment who it was that they were to have their effect against. It says, and it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree. That's what natural locusts, would be involved about. But these locusts were not for that purpose, but they were commanded not to hurt the grass, nor the green thing, nor the trees, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. That's who Mohammedanism was going to really affect, was the people who did not have the seal of God in their foreheads. And if the doctrine of Mohammedanism was believed by the people of the Eastern Empire, then of course it would weaken that empire, because that doctrine was contrary to the truth and would not have God's blessings upon it. Therefore, if they believed that false doctrine, it would bring a weakening unto them. Now then, it was not going to have any effect on true Christians, because we notice that the Bible says that they'd show great signs and wonders, insomuch as if it were possible they'd deceive the very elect. You can't deceive the very elect. The Bible said there'd be great signs and wonders shown, to where that if it were possible they'd deceive the very elect. But you see, the very elect cannot be deceived. The very elect is going to study God's Word. The very elect are going to follow God's Word. The very elect is not going to be deceived by false doctrine. But these wicked people of the Eastern Empire, they could be deceived by the false doctrine of Mohammedanism. Therefore, this doctrine would affect them, but it would not affect people who were true followers of Christianity. Therefore, Mohammedanism in reality was going to have its effect mainly as a judgment of God against the Eastern Empire, because that the Roman Empire had persecuted the cause of Christianity. God was going to use one wicked power to be a judgment against another wicked power. But Mohammedanism will not escape the judgments of God either, because they also will taste of the judgment of God because of their sins and their wickedness. But in this particular place, under the sounding of the fifth trumpet, Mohammedanism was going to have a stinging effect against those that were part of the Eastern Empire. And so it was the men that did not have the seal of God in their foreheads that was going to be affected. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. So we find now that it was going to have an effect against these people, but the purpose was not necessarily to kill, but the purpose was to sting. The purpose was to deceive. The purpose was to weaken and to have a weakening effect against. Now then, there were probably people killed within the wars that took place there, but that was not the purpose. The purpose was to be a judgment against them and to have a stinging effect against them. And in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared to battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. Now it said that this was to last for 5 months, and according to history, the holy war of the Arabs lasted from 632 approximately to 782, which will be 150 years. Now, Ezekiel 4 and 6 is a rule of prophecy which we would apply and which will be applied many other times in this study. Ezekiel 4 and 6 says, I've appointed thee each day for a year. And so the 5 months, being 150 days, let that be 150 years, and that was the length of the Arabs' wars, which weakened the eastern part of the Roman Empire. So it says that torment would last for 5 months. And in those days men shall seek death and shall not find it, shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. This was the effect that Mohammedanism was having upon them. And the shapes of the locusts, these Arabian warriors, were like unto horses prepared to battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold. They had authority, and they made their warfare in a cavalry fashion. Thus we find that horses are mentioned in the figurative language here, and their faces were as the faces of men. This evidently brings to our minds the fierceness of the Arabian warriors as they went forth to war. And they had hair as the hair of women. We didn't know any better. We'd think that's talking about here lately, but this was a way back there. They had hair as the hair of women, and it's recorded in history that the Arabs at that time that they had long hair, and their hair was similar to that of women. They had hair that long. They had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. They were a very fierce people, and they had breastplates, that is protection for them in their warfare, as it were breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. Perhaps this was the way that the Arabian cavalry made its charges in their warfare. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. 150 days, a day for a year, 150 years. It says their sting was in their tails. Now Isaiah 9 and 15 says, the prophet that speaketh lies, he is the tail. T-A-I-L. The prophet that speaketh lies. Muhammad was a false prophet. These people embraced that false religion. Therefore that false religion had a stinging effect upon the wicked people here upon the earth. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. This evidently refers to Mohammed and to the caliphs who would follow and be his successors, but if you trace it back to its origin, it would be the devil that was behind all of it. But God was allowing this power to have its effect against the inhabitants of the Eastern Empire to bring about their downfall. And Mohammedanism truly had a strong effect against the eastern part of the Roman Empire, and we would understand this to be the sounding of the fifth trumpet. But then the thing that was going to bring the eastern part of the Roman Empire to a close was the conquest of the Turks against them. Therefore, we would naturally understand that the sounding of the sixth trumpet had reference unto the Turks in their conquest against the Eastern Empire. One woe is past, and behold, there come two woes more hereafter. There was to be the woe of the sixth trumpet, and then the woe of the seventh trumpet, which of course would be against all of the wicked. But the woe of the sixth trumpet was going to bring about the downfall of the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And so it says, and the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Thus, this power and this force that was going to come against the Eastern Empire would come from somewhere around the Euphrates and would come against Rome and would serve as a judgment against them. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay the third part of men. Now Tomlinson, he takes this calculation of it. I don't know whether it's necessary to make these kind of calculations or not. But this is pretty well in his commentary, the route that he takes, that the year would be 365 and 1/4 day year, like we understand, or that 1/4 would be 3/12, and that the month would be the 30 days in a month, and the day the one, and then of course an hour, 12 days, 12 hours has the day and 12 hours has the night, that would be 1/12. And that you add that up, it's 396 and 4/12 days. Using this rule of prophecy, Ezekiel 4 and 6, a day for a year, that would be 396 years and 4 months. And then he brings forth this bit of history about it, that early in January 1057, the Turkomen marched out of Baghdad under the commission of the Caliph to begin their long conquest. On May 29th, 1453, they sacked Constantinople, ending the Eastern Empire. Just 396 years and 4 months, lacking a few days from the time they crossed the Euphrates. Again, history and the apocalyptic symbolism march hand in hand. One predicts, the other fulfills. So this is his commentary upon that, which sounds as a reasonable explanation of the time period here, that's how long that it took in their conquest against Rome to finally bring about the downfall of the Roman Empire. Then we see that there was many men in the army, for it says in the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. And I heard the number of them. This simply would show the great amount of people that were involved in the Turkish army as they invaded Rome. And thus, as they invaded Constantinople and the eastern part of the empire. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them having breastplates of fire, and of jacinth, and brimstone. And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. Now John is seeing this in figurative language, and this is the way that it appeared to him as he saw the vision and this warfare as they came against the eastern part of the empire. It would be red and blue and yellow, the way that they were dressed as it looked to him, and he said it looked like that their heads were like lions. Now if you saw horses and these Arabs upon these horses in their warfare and fighting against the enemy, perhaps it would look like this to an individual. And then out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. This is about the time in man's history that gunpowder was invented. And gunpowder was used as the Turks sacked Constantinople in 1453. They used gunpowder in that. And so we can see how that it would look this way in the vision as he would see them, and they would look in their dress like red, blue, and yellow, and then the heads of the horses and so forth looked like they had heads of they were heads of lions, and then out of their mouth, if they would be firing guns and so forth, it would look like that it was smoke and fire and brimstone. And this is the way that it was pictured to John. And the remarkable thing is that this is about the time gunpowder was brought into existence, and it was used in this particular battle and was used by the Turks according to history. By these three was the third part of men killed. There was a portion of the people killed by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold, and silver, and brass, and stone, and of wood, which neither can see, nor hear, nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. Now remember that in the year 533, that this new power had come up, the papal power, the religious power, and honor and force and authority was given unto it. In 470